Carlton King, former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in a jihadi organisation. My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy Podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security and armed governmental personal protection operations, but actually majors in on geopolitics. This week, we're looking at part 2 of the program I started last week, because people have said, how do you know this and where are you getting the info? So I'm going to play you a clip so you can understand it.
Israeli minister has made what many are calling a stunning and deeply alarming admission. Israeli ex-minister Avigdor Lieberman has openly admitted that Iran inflicted severe and unexpected damage on Israel's military capabilities during the conflict that erupted in June 2025. The former defense minister revealed that Iranian missiles successfully broke through Israel's advanced defense systems, overpowering them during a brutal 12-day confrontation. Lieberman's revelations, first reported by Iran's state-affiliated Press TV, have surfaced at a tense moment, when global concerns are mounting that the US and Israel might be preparing for another potential war. Israel's former defense minister said, quote, "We have the best air force in the world, but at the same time, we saw the real power of Iranian ballistic missiles, Emad-1, Shahab-3, Khorramshahr and others. Obviously, the Iranians struck strategic targets of Israel. I don't want to go into details. It's impossible to explain more now. The Iranians managed to destroy the laboratory and all the accumulated research. All the data and results of our work over several decades." Unquote. His remarks also coincided with growing reports suggesting that Israel may have urged Washington to hold off on a planned military strike against Iran, seeking more time to regroup. For several weeks, US President Donald Trump had repeatedly threatened to launch military action against Tehran amid violent protests, before surprisingly softening his stance later. Before the 12-day Iran-Israel war broke out, diplomats from the United States and Iran had reportedly held at least 5 intense rounds of negotiations aimed at reviving Tehran's controversial nuclear program. During those talks, Iran had drawn a firm red line, insisting that it must be allowed to continue enriching uranium within what it called its sovereign rights under international law. On June 13th, however, Israel launched a large-scale military strike against Iran, accusing Tehran of weaponizing its enriched uranium stockpiles in clear violation of previous commitments. The United States officially joined the conflict on June 22nd, deploying B-2 stealth bombers to conduct targeted airstrikes on Iran's key nuclear facilities. These airstrikes featured the use of devastating bunker-buster bombs and precision-guided Tomahawk missiles, which targeted at least 3 major Iranian nuclear complexes. In response, Iran retaliated with force, firing a barrage of missiles at an American military base located in Qatar, escalating the crisis to a dangerous new level. Tensions between Tehran and Washington have continued to rise sharply ever since, fueling widespread fears that the region might soon descend into a much larger and uncontrollable war. On January 20th, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi issued a direct and chilling warning to the United States through an article published in the Wall Street Journal. In his statement, Araghchi declared that Iran would fire back with everything it had if the country came under renewed military attack from the US or its allies. He also fiercely criticized Donald Trump's repeated public warnings against Iran's handling of domestic protests, calling them blatant acts of interference. In the same Wall Street Journal opinion piece, Araghchi argued that Trump's threats were actually giving incentive to terrorists, effectively encouraging more unrest inside Iran. The Iranian foreign minister further accused both US intelligence agents and Israel's Mossad operatives of being directly involved in fueling and coordinating some of the violent street demonstrations. Araghchi even claimed that a former director of the US Central Intelligence Agency had privately acknowledged Mossad's deep infiltration into Iran's protest movements. Iran's foreign minister said, quote, unlike the restraint Iran showed in June 2025, our powerful armed forces have no qualms about firing back with everything we have, if we come under renewed attack. This isn't a threat, but a reality I feel I need to convey explicitly, because as a diplomat and a veteran, I abhor war. An all-out confrontation will certainly be ferocious and drag on far longer than the fantasy timelines that Israel and its proxies are trying to peddle to the White House. It will certainly engulf the wider region and have an impact on ordinary people around the globe, unquote. The Iranian government's harsh crackdown on these...
So excuse the, what is it? I suppose it's meant to be expressive and meant to be decisive drum beats that are going on in the background of that actually quite good piece. It missed out on quite a couple of things, however, but did state most of what both Iran and the United States are saying in terms of their powerful politicians and their articulated perspectives as to what they're going to do in the case of a war. And it also mentioned, quite rightly, the likelihood of a war breaking out and becoming much more global in orientation. Definitely regional, for sure, as I've already mentioned when before I played the clip, as to why it would be regional, why it could become regional. But definitely the global economically, because one of the primary things that Iran talks about doing is closing the Straits of Hormuz and therefore preventing oil movements, which is what the Iranian minister was articulating in a roundabout way, that if this war happens, the rest of the world will struggle to get its energy needs met. So there is that factor. Now, whether that in the United States is being considered and whether the backers of conflict in the United States think to themselves, yeah, okay, so our shale, which is very expensive, our shale oil to create, and is coming to the end of its usefulness if the oil prices stay as they are. But if there is a shortage of oil, then all of a sudden our shale becomes, if you will, economical again to bring out of the ground. So fracking then becomes something that makes sense again. So maybe that has been articulated to the president, because of course the president's always thinking of economics. So President Trump, I mean, when I'm saying the president, I mean the president of the United States. So maybe that's been articulated to him. Don't worry, Mr. President, we'll cover some of the shortfall by fracking more, because it will then, oil will be expensive and fracking will then be useful. And of course, maybe, I don't know this in any way, shape or means, but maybe there's then the perspective that, and you're part of the fracking deal anyway, Mr. President. So, you will make more profit and your family will make more profit. Who knows? I don't know on that. But I can see where the argument regarding fracking is. Then there's the armaments guys. Well, if they're using up armaments and they are manufacturing them, then the armaments industry is a very good one to be part of. And we do know that there are presidential interests around the family within that area. So we know that. So that's a given. So that's another factor. But then you've got to look the other side of that. What will the MAGA people think? What will his base, Make America Great Again base, people think? Because when those prices go up, if fracking is economical, it means that the price of fuel is more expensive in the United States. And then these will be, generally, the vast majority of MAGAs used to be, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of 1% are wealthier people, but there's also the vast majority are poorer whites who basically want to bring about white power again. Some feminists argue male power. Yeah, I think that's gone. I think, to be fair, that there's as many females from the poor voting for Trump as there are males. I think the whole gender aspect of it, other than, of course, Christian aspects of gender, so thereby, one cannot get abortions on demand, etc., etc. That, for sure, is a woman's question. But in America, that tends to be women on the left or women on the right. There are poor women who are Christian in orientation who say there shouldn't be abortions. So it's not a stock position, more like it is in Europe, whereby the vast majority of women may turn around and say, poor or wealthy, I want my right to have an abortion when I want one. Yeah. And if it's made illegal, as it is in many states now of the Union of the United States, I lose opportunity as a woman to basically say what I want to do with my body. That's not the way a lot of Christian United States individuals think. They think, no, it's an abomination and it shouldn't happen, full stop. So it's not as black and white as it is in Europe on that issue. And that has a lot to do with more Christian fundamentalism in the US than there is in Europe. And that's a historical perspective there, because, as you know, a lot of Europeans, Christian fundamentalists, some 2-3 centuries ago, went to the United States. Because they were being hounded down in Europe, they went to the US. You only need to think of the Mormons for that. And then created their own, citadels on the hill. Some states were run by these Christian entities that they created in a particular way and now are full within the power base. And I'm thinking of Mormons as an example of that. But there are many others. And you only need to go to the southern states to see how strong Christianity is, even amongst those who were oppressed, like the blacks. Yeah. So it's not a straightforward position. You can't say it's a sole gender issue. It may be a gender issue for the more enlightened or the more educated. But again, be careful on that issue, because Trump doesn't only have ill-educated people who support him. There are some very well-educated people who support him because of the fiscal perspective he provides, which is the wealthy get wealthier. so there's that aspect. It isn't so the MAGA base of basic, normal, everyday Americans may feel that they are conned, whereas other MAGAs may think, yeah, okay, fair enough, price worth paying. So what if we're paying $4 for oil, for fuel? Don't matter to them because they're wealthy. But he has to keep his basic MAGA base happy. And the price of fuel is very, very important. As Clinton once put it, it's the economy stupid. It's very, very important for the basic individuals, for basic people. So you have to look at that. So the war in Iran can have really far-reaching problems for the United States and may well be questioned. If you jump to Europe, I think it will be questioned more when the Europeans already actually going against their electorates and suggesting to their electorates, not around Iran, but as it pertains to the Ukraine, that they're going to have to be happy with fronting much, much, much more money up for, I was going to say the nascent North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. And the reason why I was going to say that is because I'm not so sure that Trump doesn't want to leave it. I guess the only thing really keeping him in NATO right now is the people in the organization, Canada and Europe, are basically paying for his weapons, because NATO standards, they standardize weapons, and a lot of those NATO standard weapons are American. Now, when Germany puts itself to try and build those weapons, will then NATO be as attractive for the United States monetarily as it is now. Because in every other way, it's not attractive for the United States. It's pushing itself into continuing wars that the United States now doesn't want to continue. So it really is a form in the eye, I'm going to say, of Trump, not just, anywhere else in his body, but in his eye right now, because they're not doing what he's saying in many ways. Yeah, they're making some sort of appeasement noises, but they're not, and they are vassals for sure, but they, on this one issue, because this issue to them, and I'm talking the politicians now, is existential, not to the nations. Russia is not attacking them because they know that if Russia can get its way, and Russia can only, basically, as I said earlier on, occupy, which earlier on now will be in the original part, because there's going to be two parts to this podcast because it's going on for a long time now. So in part one, as I said in part one last week, that if Russia can get away with what it wishes to do, which is to only take those parts of the Ukraine, which it only ever wanted to do, take those parts of the Ukraine where there are Russian speakers and therefore people who wish to be in Russia proper, right? And then have a controlling factor around the other parts of the Ukraine in terms of limiting the size of the military available to it, making sure for absolutely and willing to go to European war, if not world war about it, that frankly European forces do not sit in what is presently Western Ukraine after the conflict is won by Russia, then this will be very problematic for the European leaders who presently sit within power. Because they've told their populace that winning Ukraine, and the next minute they'll be marching on and they'll be in Paris. And obviously in Britain we say in London. Right. And we'll have to fight them and stop them because it's Hitler, blah, blah, blah. Right. Not mentioning actually that Hitler, frankly, never had his eyes in the first instance on Western Europe. His eyes were on Eastern Europe. And it's the fact that both Great Britain and France declared war on Nazi Germany that made Nazi Germany take its actions against the western parts of Europe. Because otherwise, they had no need to do that. And I believe wouldn't have done that in the first instance. Now, what might have happened somewhere along the lines in years to come, 50s or 60s, well, maybe the power bases might have swung that happened. But initially, that wouldn't have happened. If they'd have been given the free hand to do what they wanted in the East, then that meant obviously attacking the Soviet Union, which the Westerners were happy with, but weren't happy with it that being a victory. You see, this is the problem, and I'm not going off-piste here, it's the same issue. You want for a nation, if you're a nation of power and you have got various dominoes around the world, various chess pieces around the world that you're working with, you've got to look at how one piece of your empire, whatever it might be it an open empire like the British Empire and the French Empire and the Dutch Empire, or be they closed empires like that of the United States. And what I mean by a closed empire is an empire in reality, but it doesn't look like so from the outside. The United States runs everything, or has up to now, but it's provided under the mantle of free will of others to do as they wish, when every politician knew within the other states that they didn't have free will. The populace may well have thought they had free will. That's the point I'm making. So this is my difference between closed and open empire. So one that is recognised and one that is hidden is what I'm basically saying. So when you look at the recognised open empires, what you'll find is, and also for the hidden empires to be fair, you'll find that those various pieces around the world mean you have to take various actions. So if you go back to the Vietnam War, it was all about, well, if North Vietnam takes South Vietnam, next minute it'll be Laos, then it'll be Cambodia, then it'll be Thailand. And because they're supported by the Chinese, to whatever extent they were, and they were supported by the Chinese, and by the Russians, to whatever extent they were, which is a bit more of a question, then communism will be moving its way forward. And therefore it'll be taken away from us, the capitalists. Right. So these are the dominoes falling. So what do they say then to get the populace fighting? They say communism is terrible. It wants to keep people as slaves. And, by the way, if we don't stop them in Vietnam, next chance we get to try and stop them will be in Honolulu. And before you know it, they'll be in California. Right? That's how you play the game. Now, does that sound to you, ladies and gentlemen, that there are any parallels? Of course it does. If we don't stop the Russians, they'll be in Paris tomorrow, right? And then in London. Same thing, same situation. When really what the goal was, and it was a stated goal, and it was articulated by an American Secretary of State, was that what we want to do is split up Russia. The same way when I was doing some work, it was split up Iraq, right? When I was doing some work on the Iraqis, so split up Iraq, split the countries up, split it up into 3 positions was Iraq's position. And I'm not going off it, I'm just explaining something that I am totally and utterly in bed with and understand because I was part of understanding that game. Split up Iraq into northern Kurdish region, southern, you could argue the region where it was now, you could call it Baptist, but it wouldn't have been Baptist, and a middle sort of region where it was, and then northern, southern Marsh Arabs and Shia. So you had that sort of split that was being brought about. Now, that 3-way split for them was good, for the United States, was good, because that 3-way split meant that even if they didn't directly control the oil, they could control the oil via American companies, because Iraq wouldn't be a big enough country then to control itself, and they'd want security guarantees from us, the US. We, the UK, might get a little piece of the pie, but from us, and those 3 areas that are split off, the Kurds would always be questionable as to what would happen to them, so they'd want to have a military so we could sell arms to them, etc., etc. You can go down the line, and that's the way the game's done. So you split it up so it's less powerful. It's not a threat to you, but it's a threat to itself. It's no longer a threat to the state of Israel, etc., etc. So it all comes together in a nice little package that would have been Iran. Now, one of the players who saw that, who didn't like it, that is a NATO player, and it's always been a problem for NATO, is Turkey. Because Turkey said there's not a way in the world that Kurds are having a northern Iraq. Right? Because then our Kurds will start saying, well, we want to be part of the Northern Iraqi Alliance Kurds. Syria said exactly the same, because Syrian Kurds would turn around and say, we want to be part of that, and both of them would lose territories. So this is how you get the fallout. This is the political fallout, the geopolitics of the game. So you get supposedly NATO assisting, but another part of NATO saying, no, that ain't going to happen, and we will stop that. So these are the give and takes of how you have perpetual war. And then most are quietly happy because not one or the other's got control. And that's how you can keep playing it. The Israeli term is you keep mowing the lawn. Just enough to cut them down, but enough to keep them fighting each other. You know, that's the way it works. Okay? So the problem is when you do too much, and as I was trying to articulate the position by using historical aspects that have happened, if you look at the Iran situation, you know, and you look at the Russia situation, the ideal is to split them up. Split Russia up into constituent parts. Instead of the Russian Federation, have it as various Russian bits, as here is one bit, this bit, another bit, you know. There's always somebody willing to be the head of a small place. So example, Siberia. yeah, somebody would be willing to be the president of Siberia, right? And that's who you play to. You try and get those individuals who'd be willing to play within your game. And that's why nations require a strong security service, which is most of the time a police service, because you need the laws to police it. So, the United Kingdom, by the way, is not immune to this. It lost Ireland. Its chances are it could have lost Northern Ireland. Its chances are it can lose Scotland. Its chances are less so, but it could lose Wales. So all countries have these fault lines which can be problematic, regardless of where you are, even if your people have got an abundance of everything. And that, by the way, is the first thing that oftentimes prevents it, by people saying, well, what I want to fight for, I've already got what I need. So you need to give your people an abundance. It's when the people don't have an abundance that they then start thinking about, well, why are we giving so much to the Scots when actually we down in England don't have what we need? And England's a big problem because it is an unequal system. 87% of everything is England. So the Scots, the Wales, the Northern Irish have a reason to think of seceding from the Union. That's the example. So when you look at Russia, it's exactly the same. So that's why you think, let's degrade Russia so it splits up. So it's not, think about it this way, ladies and gentlemen. I like to educate people. Think about it. It's not that these things can't happen. These things can always happen. Because if you look at how the constituent parts of nations are made, the Soviet Union is well aware, the Russians are well aware that the Soviet Union fell apart. So it's equally aware, if not more so aware, that Russian Federation can fall apart, right? And it's absolutely knowledgeable that its enemies are trying to create the advantageous to it perspectives vis-a-vis the peopling of that nation that makes them want to secede from the Union. Right? The United States is aware of it because it's had it, yes, 100 odd years ago. But when it did start having it, that problem 100 odd years ago, look at how many states supported the Confederacy and how many states supported the North. So it became, if you will, a world problem, or a European problem actually in reality, where various states, well, South America aided a little bit on various states on one side or the other, because they could see that if the United stayed as a union, then they would be next, and bits that they owned would be lost, or they would be never regained. So Mexico, example, had its perspective to where it saw the Civil War. So frankly, everybody's aware how nations can split. Czechoslovakia, Slovak and Czech republics. So don't think that these things can't happen. They can always happen. And don't think that war planners aren't planning them, because they are. Don't think that intelligence agencies haven't considered them, because they do. Don't think that security services aren't aware it can happen within their countries, so are looking closely at individuals who wish to secede from their particular union. Look at Catalan and Spain as an example, right? You've always got to consider this can happen at any stage. And this is why I wanted to bring you these clips in this week's programme, because I wanted you to see how others are seeing them. And I wanted you to understand that these things are not far away. They are never far away. And I want you to see how globally things can be drawn in. And Iran is now, I think, the hotspot of this global problem for the United States in trying to continue to retain global power, that hidden empire, that closed empire, right? The one that people don't speak to as an empire, but which in reality is, right? And for it, the dominoes are everywhere. The chess pieces are everywhere. I've just articulated a few to you. But for the United Kingdom, they're everywhere. The United Kingdom lost an empire, right? And it saw its empire basically fall. And it itself attempts not to have any more of that empire, which would be its closest affiliates, if you will, when you bring it down to England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, Channel Islands, etc. Gibraltar, some possessions in the Caribbean. So you've got to look at and one possession which is now problematic for it at the present time is so far away that it's as far away from the United Kingdom as you can get. But Trump utilised it very, very recently, Diego Garcia, to say this is how weak England is. He used the word England when he means Great Britain or the United Kingdom. So it's never far away. You've always got to look at that. The Falklands is the last major war we will find. Why? Because a possession could have been taken. So don't think that possessions can't change, because they can. And don't buy the coffee without smelling it. When people tell you that Ukraine is just about the Ukraine, don't listen to that. The Ukraine is about subsuming Russia into different parts. And the Russians know it, right? Iran is about splitting Iran up into very different parts, and the Iranians know it, right? Venezuela is about basically not taking over Venezuela, but running its oil for American companies, albeit that he should have spoken to the American companies before they actually carried out their actions against Venezuela, as whether the companies were interested anymore because of the cost of actually rebuilding everything. But, he's seeing it, President Trump that is, to a bigger picture to some extent. He's seeing it about, teaching a lesson to South Americans, controlling South Americans, controlling North Americans. To be fair, I should have actually played you the Carney speech. I should have played that, because the Carney speech is actually, I will play you some of the Carney speech. It's devastating. I'll articulate it. What Carney's actually done is he's done a deal with China. Let me say it again. The arch enemy of the United States, China. Carney in Canada has done a deal with them. Yes, I've made my mind up. I'm going to play you some of the Carney speech, and the reason why, and it's not the Davos speech, because some of you may have missed it. I'm sure most of you who are orientated towards geopolitics have listened to Carney's Davos speech. No, what I'm relating it to, what I'm talking about, is the $1 trillion deal that Carney did with the Chinese. Regarding bringing Chinese cars into Canada, and indeed other issues, because this is very, very important. And if you listen to the reporter, you'll get the gist of what she's saying as well. So I'll put you the reporter, and then I'll put you Mark Carney's answer to it, the Prime Minister of Canada. And it's very, very interesting, because Canada, along with Mexico, etc., Venezuela, they all feel the heat from the United States. Frankly, they all feel as though there are regime change operations happening within all of their countries. Trump says we'll make Canada the fifth state. Well, in Trump's mind, he's not joking. And I think people now realise this, particularly with the capture of Maduro. So listen to this, and you will get an understanding at where I think we are with the blatant and open regime change activities rather than the covert activities, and the blatant and open gangster pressurization of leaders rather than the behind the scenes pressuring of leaders. Because when you're pressuring leaders openly, the populaces are seeing this, so they can't hide it. Look, the United States have always pressured people. I mean, Britain, we stood down with the Anglo-French attack on the Suez Canal because behind the scenes we were forced to. Okay? I'll tell you another one. We left Basra, the British, that is, controlling the area of Basra, because the Americans forced us to, right? And they put in charge an Iraqi unit and American units to it because we weren't performing. Those are facts. And I know that straight from the horse's mouth. That's all I'll say there, right? So, but the populace doesn't know that. Our people were able to go back to the United Kingdom and say, oh, we've basically, in terms of the Iraq one, we've basically moved to allow the Iraqis to take over their own area, blah, 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 right? It's our commitment is lessened, blah, blah, blah. We're going to do some activities somewhere else, blah, blah, blah. You could always spin it, and it was spun in that particular way. But when the President of the United States openly on a stage tells you you're rubbish, bend down and I'm going to do whatever I want to do with you, right? There is no place to go. So the leaders are made to look like clowns. And that is affecting them. So for some, they feel the way to do it is to stand up. And Carney is now standing up. So listen to this and tell me what you think.
Please bear with us. Prime Minister, this announcement I'd like you to characterize it in terms of how big an entry into the market you expect it really is. And how do you intend to explain it to the U.S. In allowing that entry? And separately, how do you intend to explain it to Canadian car makers who fear any softening on Chinese EVs?
Okay, so you mean the auto portion of the broader partner? Yes, okay. So I think the first thing to say is exactly that it's part of a broader partnership, and the fundamental issue is we have a broader strategic partnership on which to build and create big opportunity. But to get to the auto question and your various questions around specifically, let's put this in context. 49,000 vehicles, which is the cap on Chinese electric vehicle exports to Canada. That's part of this agreement. That's a return to levels last seen in 2023, the last full year before the Canadian tariff actions. That's the first point. Second point, again, to dimension it, that's less than 3% of the size of the Canadian auto market. The third point, to put in context, I reference this, is that part of this agreement, and it takes a few years to build this, a couple of years to build this, that an increasing portion of those exports will be in a new segment of the Canadian market. In other words, electric vehicles that cost less than $35,000 at the landed price. So there's huge opportunity here to get more affordable cars in the electric vehicle market for Canada. The fourth element, and in many respects the most important element, is the beginning of discussions and expectation of Chinese investment in Canada and partnership in Canada to produce vehicles over time, so to partner with Canadian firms. And putting all this, and if I can take the last part of your question and move to colleagues, which is vis-a-vis the U.S., I think we need to look at this in the context of building. I mean, we're building a new part of our car industry, building cars of the future in partnership, bringing affordable autos for Canadians at a time when affordability is top of mind, and doing it at a scale that allows for a smooth transition in the sector. Thanks.
Right, so what he didn't say there is, and this is the interesting point, first and foremost, I will say he did mention it's a strategic partnership of $1 trillion. He didn't say that, but that is what the overall position is, and that's what they've signed up to, the Canadians. But it's strategic, so it's not something that's here today and gone tomorrow, and it is a treaty, so that's what he's telling you. So the next bit is, what he's not saying is that when the Canadians get used to electric cars at 35 grand, right, that are superb, and then the Chinese are going to knock out superb cars, which they already do, and put them in that market. What Canadian then is going to go back to an American gas guzzler or a Canadian type gas guzzler American gas guzzler made in Canada? They're not, right? They're not. He knows that. But the other bit that he's not saying is, well, he did say they'll come together and work with Canadian companies. That's what he said. Now, that's quite easy because there are a lot in Canada, particularly in that west coast, down by Vancouver, etc. A lot of Canadians are of Chinese heritage. And I can imagine that already they've worked out how they can bring across Chinese capacity, utilising their heritage and use of the Chinese language, etc., etc., etc. So it's quite easy for that to be done. So you've got that aspect that, not everybody is an Anglo sitting in Canada, right? So, and he's acknowledging that sensibly, whereas the United States tends to, under this regime of Trump, tends to try to go back to an Anglo or European orientation only of the United States. It forgets its Afro, it's what the Americans call Asian, but we would call Far Eastern and then South Asian peoples. It's global background, whereas the United States is presently chasing away its global aspect. Canada's seeing its global aspect as it relates to China. So there's that aspect. And thirdly, what will happen is, because of NAFTA and the agreement still in place in NAFTA, those Chinese cars, which they will be then made in Canada, will be able to be sold into the United States. You see, so it's a double, treble, triple whammy. Great. That's what strategically is seen there. He's looking at it and saying, yeah, we will take X amount off the dime through that. Yes, there'll be Chinese cars. It'll be mainly Chinese technology, Chinese processes, but we'll have part of that because we'll be producing those cars the same way as the United Kingdom does. The United Kingdom doesn't produce its own vehicles. It basically manufactures vehicles in the United Kingdom, be they Honda or be they Stelios vehicles from the rest of Europe, other parts of Europe, or be they American, like Ford. They're being produced in the United Kingdom. They are not, if you will, created, understood, designed and manufactured in the United Kingdom. Well, they're manufactured in the United Kingdom. Yeah. And the headquarters of these companies are not in the United Kingdom. The same way as I'm going to say to you now, the headquarters of those companies in Canada will not be in Canada. They'll be in China. Right? So that is what he's taking, and he's accepting that. He's saying, yeah, fair enough, as long as we get a piece of the pie. He's being strategic, because then we've got some independence from the United States, because that's the other part of the unspoken aspect. And he hedged his bets, as you can listen, when he was talking about the US. He didn't want to say this gives him and Canada a much freer hand away from the United States. That is what he didn't say that is writ large within this deal. So I started off with Iran. We're still on Iran, and by the time you listen to this second episode, it may well be the case that some military activity has taken place in Iran, purely and simply because President Trump needs a win. And then we'll see where we go from there. Can President Trump's Israeli backers hold him off? If Trump really wants to do it, I don't know if they can. Can they hold him off? Or do the Israelis now think it's the right time? Because they may now think, we've got some, we were weak on this, we've fixed the Iron Dome, we've fixed it, so therefore now we can go at the Iranians once and for all. So we've got a president who's going to do everything for us, and we'll destroy him. And we'll then split them up into the constituent parts, because we've already been dealing with the Baluchis, the Azeris, the whomever out, the Kurds, whomever want a little piece of whatever. And we'll split them up so they're not ever a powerful land again. Take into account that Iran is as big as Western Europe. Right? People don't seem to understand that. It's as big as the whole of Western Europe. So, let's split it up. Bosh, does it need to be one part? Let's have the other bits of it coming together. And I'll leave you with this. So if it doesn't go the way and they do start this conflict and Iran does start to hit back and Iran doesn't bottle it in the last moment but actually says, yeah, we're going to destroy everything and everybody who's come at us, and they do, and particularly for that you could read the Israeli state will probably be the biggest recipient of Iranian munitions that rain down on them, and Israel does look as though it's going to fold totally. Does Israel then utilise some of its nuclear capacity? Because other countries would. So does Israel do that? If it's totally existential. And then, because of that, do fellow travellers, not in terms of their understanding or their moving with the countries, but do fellow Islamic countries say, I'm not having it? And does somebody like Pakistan with nuclear weapons say, right, we now fire on Israel? What does the United States then do? And because Pakistan gets involved, do then others say, well, we're not having the United States destroy Pakistan fully. We've not got nuclear weapons, but we can take some action against the United States. Or is there a demand from the Chinese and from the Russians that the United States don't do that? And when they do it, then they think we've got to hit at the United States because, frankly, they are out of control. Because one of the big things that you've got with the transactional nature of how Trump works is that, yes, in business that might be great that you put a forceful hand in and you don't know what you're going to do from one day to the next. But in politics, what it makes you be is it makes you questionable. And intelligence and security services don't know what you might do. And they feed then intelligence reports to their militaries saying, look, we can't read this guy. We can't read whether he'll just do a first strike on us. And then you get jitters because you don't know what's going to happen. So it's very, very dangerous. So I'm going to leave you with that, ladies and gentlemen, and hopefully by the time you get this second episode, we are not at war in Iran and potentially throughout this globe. Ladies and gentlemen, hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully you'll hear from me again next week.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.